Nice to be back, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, where are you from?
This episode of TCG Cast is sponsored by AlchemistRefuge.shop, your one-stop website for TCG singles, sealed product, supplies, and more. You can help support TCG Cast as well as a local business by shopping at Alchemist Refuge. And make sure to use the code TCGCast at checkout for 5% off of everything you purchase from AlchemistRefuge.shop.
Hello, Aladdin. Nice to have you on the show. Can we call you Al or maybe just Din? Or how about Laddie? Sounds like here, boy. Come on, Laddie.
Life is your restaurant. Life is your restaurant. Life is your restaurant. Life is your
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the happiest podcast on earth. We are TCG Cast, and we are coming at you pre-recorded with our team. Myself, Sugi. We're here with Greg. How you doing, my man?
What's poppin'? How are we doing? Good to be back in the saddle, if you will, for another episode of TCG Cast.
Oh, yes. And we have a special guest, Brandon, a.k.a. BSquared, who is joining us to talk all about Lorcana and casting Lorcana events. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, friends. It's awesome to be here. Thank you guys for inviting me on. I'm excited. I've been following and listening to TCG Cast before it was TCG Cast, so long time fan.
And you were here for the infamous Magic Mirror debate. That was a
oh yes,
man,
long forgotten, dude. Nobody even knows about that anymore.
Your punchline is the game is over
remember.
by the time you resolve several instances of Magic Mirror. It was good.
Yeah,
many moons ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
Hey, I'm just saying nobody plays Magic Mirror anymore. That's all I'm saying. I'm gonna leave it
one
at
day.
that.
One day,
staple.
Someone will. We'll be keeping an eye out for that Magic Mirror meta. But for people who don't know you or may not be aware of the other content you create, why don't you tell people where they can listen to your other podcasting and video stuff?
Absolutely. So I have a YouTube channel that I primarily work on. It's just at BSquared24. I post a lot of YouTube content revolving around Lorcana, everything from product openings to how to build deck videos. The goal of the channel is essentially to bridge the gap for casual players moving into competitive play or wanting to get better at the game. So there's that. I also have a weekly live show with John T from the Inkwell. That's over on his channel, but I do a lot of collaboration over there. So you can check us out there on Monday nights at 9:30 Eastern, I believe. So that's primarily what I do. There's some other projects I have in the works, but we'll leave it at that.
Yo, bringing it full circle here. I knew the Inkwell before he was the Inkwell. So
yeah,
ancient history we have right here. Yeah, we're all kind of Lorcana old heads on this. The three of us on this show right now. So
yeah, man,
feeling targeted.
It's a blast of the past. Our
right?
good old 8-card D23 speculation content.
Oh yeah, those are the
days.
Old puns,
those are the days.
Yeah, tapping down Elsa, super broken in Magic, not that broken in Lorcana.
Nope, not even remotely anymore.
Well, let's just jump into the main topic for this show, and that's going to be Brandon has been casting for Lorcana on Twitch at let's see, you were at Chicago and Atlanta. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that experience, because there's not many people who've done it, and you've been to 2 events. So like what's the feel, what's the vibe for people who may not be able to make it to these events, because there's people who may not have the time, the availability, the resources, but they're seeing it through the lens of Twitter or YouTube. And let's be honest, that's not particularly the best lens ever, because being able to hear about it sets you at a stage and sets a scene. So, take us to these events and, paint us a picture of, what the event was like.
Yeah, so Disney Lorcana has only recently started their Disney Lorcana Challenges, which is essentially their regional version of a large tournament. You can earn invites and other really great stuff to a larger continental tournament that'll happen at closer to the holiday season, and then there'll be a continental tournament both in North America and in Europe. Both of those will lead to a world championship. So Disney Lorcana is just now starting off those. Like you guys mentioned, there was one in Atlanta and another in Chicago. I've actually been the only caster behind the desk to be there physically at both, so that's been really fun. There's been a lot of bumps that we've hit along the way, but Chicago was a lot better than Atlanta was. That was really awesome. And I'm not usually one to try to induce FOMO into people, because I understand that this is a luxury, right? To be able to go to these events. But I can't stress enough how awesome being in person at these events are, even just from the caster standpoint. I think it's super fun for me because I get to do the thing that I've wanted to do for a very long time. But even just the players, they've started a new thing where you play all of day one basically, and in Atlanta you didn't get any prize tickets. There's a prize wall that you can go get a bunch of cool stuff at, but you're not earning prize tickets while you're playing in the main event. And it's a 2-day event, 9 rounds, a new format, 2-game format. And so everybody that played all day in Atlanta didn't have the opportunity to play side events and earn tickets for the prize wall. They changed that in Chicago so that certain point thresholds will get you certain prize tickets at the end of the day, which really, really helped the retention rate of people playing. I think there was over 85% of players still playing in round 9 at the end of the day that were playing in round 1. So it's a really great incentive to keep playing, and it's just super fun, like being in a building where there's 2,000 people or 1,000 people who all share this same hobby with you, which is Disney and trading card games. You know, the Disney fandom can be pretty nuts on its own, but I don't know, there's just something super special about Disney Lorcana specifically and its fan base. And I think the thing I enjoy the most with being there is getting to see all the people that I get to interact with online every day in person. I feel like the Lorcana community can be pretty close together, or tight knitted. So being able to see each other at these events is the best part. And you're just with people all day. Everybody's like cosplaying or has Mickey ears, or, you know, there's really awesome stuff like that happening. And just being in that atmosphere for an entire weekend, it's difficult to correctly explain over a microphone or through a live stream, for sure.
Right. I think you highlighted a lot of good points, especially about the point system. I think one of the biggest dilemmas of any competitive card player, depending, like, no matter what game you play, it's always the question of, okay, well, you know, I have 2 or 3 losses so far throughout this event. At what point do I just cut my losses and start playing in the side events to see if I can start getting like a more minor prize, like a lesser of a prize in the main event, but it's like actually something I could actually like compete for at this point, you know? Because like there's always a question about like an opportunity cost of being like, oh, okay, well I could keep on playing this event in the hope that I bubble in, or like someone fails deck check, or you know, like for some off chance that like you could make it into this top cut. Or you just play side events. And I think, you know, Ravensburger really incentivizing people just like, you know, it doesn't matter. Like, we want to play games, you know, just play out the event was really a good move. And, of course, you know, we mentioned it's like, you know, some sort of growing pain. It's just, you know, no matter the size of the company, we're going to see some things that players would prefer more than the previous iteration that they had. And, you know, when it comes to being able to implement these, like, immediately, I do, you know, tip my hat off to Ravensburger for kind of being able to do that, immediately. But so that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, one of the really cool things about the 2-game format that they introduced is that, unlike something like Best of 3, where you usually know after a couple rounds the likelihood of you making it to day 2, so like you mentioned, you have a good idea of whether or not you should drop and go do other stuff. With 2-game format, I mean, like it's basically anybody's game up until the last round. Like there's of course certain records that you know you're very likely not to top with, and you can drop a little bit earlier. That's where it created this weird situation where everybody was playing all day, and you had to cut your losses early where you potentially could have still made it just to go do the side event stuff or risk it and try to make day 2. So them innovating on that and giving people a reason to stay in the event and rewarding the players who still did well, like with prize tickets, is a really great answer to that.
Right. I think it is interesting though. I mean, you highlight a great thing about the 2-game format where it is, you know, like someone who's undefeated could then go ahead and lose all their games, right? And so what happens is that there's actually a big swing kind of like a Tamatoa and a Lucky Dime if we were to put a comparison to the game, right? But there's this huge swing where like you feel like you're out of it, and then you just get like 18 points over the course of 3 rounds, you know? And you're like, wow, where did that all come from? And it's just from the fact that you just kept on winning. You went on an absolute tear towards the end of the event. And I think that's also something that's pretty interesting. It feels like, you know, there is some predictability to it, but, you know, as most great matches in card games, you never really know. You can never really be counted out until you play out the whole thing.
Now, if someone's listening and they're coming from a traditional card game like, you know, Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, and you're playing the best of 3, which means you play until someone wins 2 games, what is the difference between a 2-game format versus a best of 3 format, so that newer players or people who are not exactly versed in the competitive Lorcana scene know what you're talking about?
Sure. So Disney Lorcana has started what they call a 2-game format, which rather than looking at a match as a whole, like you normally see with the best of 3, where the person who wins the most games out of the 3, you know, gains a certain number of points. It's usually 3 points and then 1 point for a draw. You are gaining points instead based on each game win. So there was a discrepancy noticed early in the game based on who got to go first. So previously Lorcana was playing in a best of 3 format, and people notice there's a pretty large win percentage between the people who just got to go first versus who got to go second. So to get rid of that inherent advantage, they created the format where you are only playing 2 games in a match rather than 3 or 1. That way that each player has an opportunity to go first. So you would normally roll the die like normal. Whoever wins the roll gets to decide which game they want to go first in. And then win or lose, the other person goes first in the other game. And so you play both of those games out. For each game that you win in your 2 games for the match, you get 3 points. And then if you manage to win both of your games in your match, you get an extra point. So essentially, if you go 2-0, you walk away with 7 points. If you go 1-1, you walk away with 3 points. And if you go 0-2, you walk away with 0 points.
Yeah, so I kind of want to pick your brain here, Brandon, about you know, kind of a fan theory that I saw. You know, some people with the developed brain, you know, some people with Gaston's brain think that perhaps there's a difference between choosing to go first in game 1 or choosing to go second during game 1. Do you think that makes a real significant difference from kind of what you've experienced during casting, or do you think it's really just kind of which game you want to get out of the way first so you can focus on the next game?
This has definitely been a debate that I've heard a lot of people talk about, which I think is an interesting one, especially when 2-game format was first announced, because people were trying to decide exactly what you said, right? Like, is it better for me to concede going first on game 1 in the unknown matchup so that I can go first on game 2 and know what I'm playing against? Because there's obviously that benefit you have in the second game of knowing what your opponent's playing versus in the first you don't know. And I've found historically that just going first in game 1 is still better, because the advantage of going first is still a good one. It's not so much that it's breaking the game. Actually, Brian, the winner of the Chicago Challenge, he was lower seeded in day 2. So I think he went second in every single one of his day 2 games going first and still won. So he was on the draw for the majority of the day and still managed to win. But in Disney Lorcana, something like tempo and board presence and getting your characters out earlier than your opponent is just so strong that being able to force your opponent to react to you immediately in game 1 before they know how to mulligan their hand, specifically for your matchup, is just too good to pass up. And I'd say in 90% of instances, maybe even more than that, if you have the option of choosing which game you go first in, I think the correct decision is just to go first in game 1, because if you win game 1 after going first, now your opponent's on the back foot and they really need to win game 2 so they don't walk away with 0 wins for the day. And you've already secured at least 1 win, so you're setting yourself up for that extra point that you wouldn't get if you decided to go first in game 1 or in game 2 and then it ended up losing the first game.
Oh, see, yeah, that's really interesting. Like at first I would have thought there would have been no real difference, you know, where it's like you play 1 game going second, you play 1 game going first. But it's kind of like, I don't know if you all have ever heard of the Monty Hall problem, but it's kind of like there's this game show, there's 3 doors and you pick a door, and then the game show host reveals a door that has a goat in it, which is like the non-prize of the thing. And then you can choose the other door, right? And most people say like, oh, well, why would I switch Twitch, it's the same, 33% chance no matter what. But it turns out because you have more information of the goat being revealed. In this case, in Lorcana, it might literally be that they're playing Merlin Goat, right? So like this analogy works so much better than I thought it would. But yeah, the fact that you can change your answer depending on turn order or knowing what your opponent's deck is, it's actually it kind of creates a dilemma similar to the Monty Hall problem, where it's like going first is going to be the correct call most of the time. I think that's really interesting. So I got one more question for you, Brandon, and I think that this is going to be an interesting one for people that are interested in just knowing how commentary works in card games, maybe people who want to start commentating their own YouTube videos, fun things like that. But what would you say when it comes to being able to communicate these ideas with people at, let's see, how do I put it? Like in a way that's digestible to like the general audience. So, I know that you have a background in math. I listened to the Citizens of Lorcana podcast where you talked about how you had a big, background in statistics, things like that. And when it comes to me playing a game, I think in, math problems and virtual card advantage. A lot of my background comes from just like reading Patrick Chapin, like talking about Magic and theory. But when it comes to like commentating the game, I'd imagine it's going to be a bit more difficult to like relay this information to a general audience. So kind of what are some tips that you have about being able to kind of be as forward-facing and as approachable as a commentator as possible and with these kind of massive events?
Sure. So I think this is an especially important thing for Disney Lorcana because we find ourselves in an interesting place where there are a lot of people getting into this game who have never played trading card games before or anything like trading card games before. They're frankly just Disney fans and have seen the card game, and maybe somebody they know plays the game that got them into it, and so they're not used to all of the statistical numbers and terminology that we're used to as people who've played previous card games. And specifically when commentating the Disney Lorcana Challenges, we were kind of told to be aware of that they didn't want us to commentate a trading card game that had Disney characters on it. It was going to be a Disney stream about a trading card game. So it was way more important for them that we were approachable and entertaining to watch as a Disney fan, maybe with little knowledge or not as much knowledge about the fundamentals of a trading card game, than it was to be super analytical and call out all the plays and do all of that you may see in other trading card games. The approach that I've always taken to commentary is my goal as a commentator is to educate and to inform. So I come from a Pokemon background mainly, and one of the things that I really appreciated about their streams for their regionals and stuff is I may not always understand what's going on in the game as an outside player, especially one that doesn't keep up with the game as closely as I used to, but it's entertaining to watch. The commentators get excited when something happens. The cards come up on stream, and they're explaining what some of the cards do. They're explaining why certain matchups may be difficult, and they're explaining what each person's deck, like the goal of the deck is and what it's trying to do, so that even if you don't follow this game closely, you can still get a story being built, or you can understand what each player is, what their goal is, and what they're trying to do. So for instance, the evil deck of Chicago was a Bucky discard deck. It's an Emerald Steel deck, and the goal of that deck is simply to discard your opponent's hand as fast as possible so that they don't have resources to put into their inkwell or to play against you and stop your building board so that you can end the game relatively quickly. And so just explaining that to the audience, they don't need to know exactly how Bucky works. They don't need to know the intricacies of the deck. And of course, we went into further detail in the Chicago Challenge.
Yeah, or what the floodboard characterization is. Like,
exactly.
Oh, when you look at the middle of a card, there's a small sliver that indicates that the card is a floodborne type.
Exactly.
That's good minute detail, but it doesn't really quite paint the full picture about what these decks are trying to do, like a macro level, right?
Right. Like at the end of the day, I'm trying to make it so that anybody, regardless of their skill level, can keep up with what's happening on board and can follow along, because the most exciting parts of a trading card game are when an upset happens, or when somebody like finds the one card they need after digging 5 cards deep, to save themselves from the game. And you don't get that tension if you're not following what each deck is actually trying to do and understanding it at a base level. So I usually just lean on that, don't get too deep into the weeds over what all the cards do and what the synergy or strategies are, and try to keep in mind the audience that could be watching the game, which in our case were people who are relatively inexperienced with trading card games and who might play this game casually but don't keep up with the intricate meta of Disney Lorcana and automatically know which matchups are favored and which ones aren't, and etc.
Yeah, I think that's awesome advice. I think it's actually incredible that, I would assume par for the course when it comes to these production companies, but like making sure that kind of from the onset rather, that this is a Disney stream that can appeal to card gamers, right? I'm sure it wasn't said exactly like that. But I think it really is great advice, because I'm sure that the way that you commentate these events in particular are going to be different than the way that you do it for like your core audience on YouTube, for example, which are people that have subscribed specifically for Lorcana, that have like the viewer base and backing, that have shown this kind of invested interest in the game. And I think it's really interesting too, because one of my most memorable college lecturers, he kind of came in the room one day, he drew a stick figure of a student and a stick figure of a professor and then a laptop between them, and he said, "This is you, this is your reader," and then he points to the laptop, he says, "You write for your reader," right? And so when it comes to that, I think his big thing was that like, no, I'm not going to understand your TikTok memes, I'm not going to understand your Zoomer speak in your college essays. And, I think understanding who your target audience is for these types of events is actually going to be very crucial in determining what the content of that event should be. And so, I think you absolutely killed it, Brandon. It was, it's awesome seeing you up there on the podium to kind of commentate, especially, considering that we've known you from the very beginning. So, it's a very proud moment for a lot of us that have known you for a long time. But, thanks for sharing. And, you did a great job.
Thank you guys. And thank you for having me on. Like I said earlier in the podcast, we've been following each other for a long time. We've been following each other's journey, and it's crazy to me still to see my own name up there. I didn't think anything like this would happen this soon. It's been really awesome, and I'm happy I could come on and talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, it's been fun to see how the Lorcana community has evolved over time. And as we're getting closer to the end of the show, because we're trying to keep things around 30 minutes or so, because everyone's got a really busy life, can you share any fun or funny stories coming from either of the events you attended? Because usually there's always something cool going on that we may or may not have heard about through the grapevine.
Yeah, so there's quite a few funny stories that I could talk about from the casting experience. One of them is that in Atlanta, I was with Liam from the Illumineers. We were both of the on-site casters for that event. And it was the first Disney Lorcana Challenge in North America, the first one that the broadcasting company was running. Everybody wanted everything to go smooth. We're in a really weird setup because the actual room that the entire championship was in, or challenge was in, was basically like a giant warehouse room in the bottom of a convention center. And so the only thing between the production crew and the rest of the players are these essentially curtains that they've put up. And so we can hear everybody talking in the background. There's a lot of noise, and every time they make an announcement over the speakers, it's really loud and difficult for us to hear. But of course, as commentators, we have our headsets that we put on, our little microphone on the headset that we can talk through. And Liam and I get ready. We put our headsets on. They count us down to open. We unmute our microphones and start talking, and immediately realize neither of us can hear each other in the other one's headset. So we immediately panic and tell the production crew, like, hey, we can't hear anything, but we're having to pretend like we're not panicking because we're live. And then we also realized, normally the production crew can be in your ear, so they can talk back to you. We can't hear anything from them. We can't hear anything on the TV that we're watching that we're supposed to hear. And so for a lot of the challenge, or for a lot of the casting for the Atlanta Challenge, was just me and Liam sitting as close to each other as we could with our headphones on, because we couldn't hear each other, talking as loud as we could into the microphone so that we could hear each other's voices through the headsets and through everybody else's, the just mumblings of the room as everybody else is talking. And then of course it got even worse when they would say stuff on the loudspeaker, but it was a panic moment. There were a couple of times in the opening where it cut to a slide and our audio wasn't going through. So Liam and I are talking and nobody knows that we're talking because it's just silence. And then one last funny story. In the semifinals of Atlanta, we were commentating over Joshua, who ended up winning the event, and I don't remember the other person's name, but before each time we went on, they would show the brackets up to that point. We'd talk about the players and their decks, getting to that point, the decks they had to play through, the matchups, etc. And for some reason on the bracket, Joshua's deck was an Emerald Steel deck. So we talk about Emerald Steel and its matchups going through and the difficulties it's going to have going into this next game if it wants to make it into the finals. And then there's also an interview, the Tannen Grace. I don't know if you guys know him from Magic or Flesh and Blood, but he was the interviewer for the Disney Lorcana Challenge. And before each match, a interview would come on. It was either from the players of the match before, or it was an interview before the match on what the person was expecting and thinking about going into the match. But again, Liam and I can't hear anything that's on the TV. So we've talked about Emerald and Steel cards and this and that, expecting it to be discard or a Floodborn Emerald Steel. And so it cuts to the interview. Liam and I can't hear anything. And Tannen and Joshua are talking about all these amber cards, and we can't see the chat either. It's like we have literally zero idea that anything's going wrong. But on the back end, everybody sees, oh wait, why are they talking about amber cards? What the heck is going on? So then it cuts to the actual match, because these aren't live, by the way. These are pre-recorded, and then we live cast over the pre-recording. So then it cuts to the match. Liam and I are continuing to talk about the matchup. And then Joshua inks an amber card, and we're like, wait a second, this isn't right. And then we're like, okay, this is interesting, and we just try to move along with that. And then we see he plays an amethyst card, which is also not the other color that he was supposed to be playing. So at this point, I don't know if the deck check went wrong. I don't know if the slides we were given were wrong. I don't know what's going on here, but we just continue with the match. And so on the fly, we're trying to figure out, okay, well, we don't know what Joshua's deck is. It's Amber Amethyst. I'm going to assume it's Hyper Aggro, because that was the only variant of that deck that I'd seen anybody play in the set 3 meta. So we start talking about Hyper Aggro and its matchup into, I think it was Ruby Amethyst is what he was playing into.
Win before turn 7.
Yeah, we were like, go fast.
Yeah, basically.
And then he plays a Fairy Godmother card. And I think Liam and I pulled it off pretty well, because at this point you can't see us. You're just watching the casting game. But as soon as the Fairy Godmother hits the table, Liam whips out his phone and immediately starts Googling what the heck this card is and what it does, because it's never seen play competitively at all, and neither of us knew it was happening. So I'm stalling, trying to talk about this.
The classic, that classic set 2 staple, Fairy Godmother Floodborn.
And we stalled just long enough for Liam to pull out his phone and search it up so that we could read what the card actually did. And then, of course, I talked about Hyper Aggro and how that deck wants to run. And then he's not even playing a Hyper Aggro deck. He's playing a Perdita Mufasa, more mid-range version of the deck.
I'm not going to lie, Brandon. I think if I were one of the talking heads in that situation, either you or Liam, I would have not... I would have just cracked down. I would have started laughing so hard. Can you imagine? Just you look at each other from across the booth, right? And you see someone pull their phone out to start looking up a card. That's when I would have started cracking up. It would have been so funny. But, yeah. Congrats on maintaining your composure there. I'm sure that was some trials
The
and
show
tribulations.
must go on.
Exactly.
Exactly.
100%.
It was fun because we were figuring it out along with the rest of the chat. Like nobody else knew it was happening. Nobody else knew what Josh was playing. It felt weird at the time, right? Because the casters were supposed to be the ones that know all the things about these players' decks. We're supposed to know what the decks are trying to do and how they match up into the opponent's decks and talk about all of that. I had no clue what Joshua's deck was trying to do, and just I had literally never seen anybody play this deck in my life. And so on the fly, Liam and I are trying to figure it out. And I think we did a pretty good job. He ended up winning the event, which was super, super fun to see. I think it was a great story on just how diverse the set 3 meta was for Disney Lorcana. So it ended up being super fun, but it's an experience and a story I don't think I'm ever going to forget. As it was my first ever official being like hired to cast gig, and we get thrown, all of these wrenches into the system. So it was fun. It was a learning experience, but it was really awesome.
Yeah, that was a targeted experience.
That's a great
Brandon.
story. Yeah.
Yeah. They
They were
put in the
testing you.
curveball just for you.
They were testing
yeah.
you. Yeah.
Oh, man, he doesn't know all 700 cards in Lorcana. Man. Never hiring him again, which is funny considering the fact
and their
that
permutations.
he did get hired again. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's something else to mention. So in Chicago, we were lucky enough that we had somebody behind a computer, Hal Brady, that was able to pull up cards on screen as they were played for the viewers to watch. We didn't even have that for Atlanta. So Fairy Godmother came down and like nobody could read the card. Nobody knew what the heck the card did. They were relying on us to tell them that, and we also didn't know. But we figured it out eventually. We made it there.
That's cool. That's really cool. All right, so last topic of this episode, set 5. Shimmering Skies. We got that one right. That's a tricky one.
Yes, Shimmering Skies.
But there's some cards that have been revealed. It's looking like a very interesting set. Wreck-It Ralph fans are eating very well for set 5. What do you think so far? Just, fun preliminary thoughts. It doesn't have to be meta-defining, but we've seen enough cards to kind of get a feel for some of the range of the set and what they're trying to do. So what do you think so far with what we've seen?
Yeah, so there aren't any cards that particularly immediately stand out, in my opinion. There's a couple that I think are going to be pretty strong. I, of course, was really excited to see the Wreck-It Ralph characters. So far, we only have a single Wreck-It Ralph card. It was a teased card, I think in set 2, maybe set 3.
Pick a fight.
Yeah,
Set 2,
pick a
yep.
fight. And since then we saw nothing from Wreck-It Ralph. Nobody knew when it was going to come. So before the Lorecast where they revealed Shimmering Skies, I said, it'd be great for us to finally get that. And of course we got very spoiled with a bunch of Vanellope and Ralph cards and a bunch of Racer cards as well. So I'm excited for that. There's a fun new Merlin card coming into the game that is just a straight up pick any card from your deck if you shift this card. That's caused a lot of talk on how strong or not strong the card's going to be, because previously we haven't really had a tutor. We had a kind of tutor in set 3 that never saw play because it put the card on the top of your deck and it had to be a specific classification of card. So I think there's some exciting stuff coming up. We're in an interesting spot in Disney Lorcana right now where there are certain cards that are outright keeping a bunch of other cards from being played. And so I'm eager to see if Shimmering Skies can change that a little bit, bring in some cards that shake that up some. But overall, I'm just kind of excited to see more of IPs that I really like. We're getting more Moana cards, we're getting more Lion King cards. We've seen cards from Emperor's New Groove and a bunch of other really cool stuff. I don't think we've seen any particularly new mechanic yet for this set, but we've seen a couple new classifications. Like there's a racer classification because there's a bunch of the racers from Wreck-It Ralph. So that's interesting, and I'll be interested to see how they tie that into the game.
Mario Kart keyword hype. Yeah. Mario Kart keyword real. Anyway, yeah, so, this set's really cool. They revealed in the Lorecast, I seem to be doing these once a quarter nowadays, which I think is an awesome move. Unironically, I think we have seen more playables from this set with, the 20 or so cards revealed than we have seen in the entirety of Ursula's Return, which is, it's not a testament to the strength of this set. I think it's more of a indication that Ursula's Return is less than or below average in terms of card quality. But, Yeah, and that's neither here nor there. But, I think we got, some interesting tools here, just to go over a couple of them. I do really like Elsa the Fifth Spirit. It's just a card that, like, keeps on saying more things on it, and I think that's always awesome to kind of have, like, keyword soup in this game. So 5-cost Inkable, 2/5 with 1 lore. Rush, evasive, and then you exert something when you play her. And so it's like, I mean, it's one of those cards that, like, when you stack 3 abilities on top of a card with a decent stat line, turns out the card's actually going to be pretty decent. So that's if I had to pick one of them out of this dump of reveals, then of course there's the obvious, outs Diablo thing, but I think its application is actually pretty wide in this case.
No, I totally agree. Evasive has been a really strong keyword in Disney Lorcana for a long time, and especially in set 3 with Diablo, evasive has picked up a lot. People have had to tech against evasives a lot. Unfortunately, Elsa's really expensive, so it's a bit later than you're needing an answer for Diablo, but exactly like you said, having a card that has rush on it is really strong. Having evasive on it is really strong because now you can challenge evasive characters. And when you play it, you can exert any character. So essentially, unless the character has ward, it's susceptible to being rushed down by Elsa. And Elsa's inkable, which is maybe like the most crazy thing about the card, that she's not an uninkable rush character. So that's definitely one of the few that stand out to me early in this set, but it's hard to tell, man. There's so many cards from Ursula's Return that people thought were going to do really well that haven't seen much play, and then there were cards that people completely overlooked in Ursula's Return that are meta staples right now. So
yeah, and like I kid you not, I think that list of playable Ursula's Return cards is like less than 20. Like it's
probably
not too much, but not to harp on that. But also more for this Elsa card, I think it's also worth considering that you're an Amethyst, so your cards are actually pretty sticky, right? Snake doesn't immediately die to a Brawl. Fox doesn't immediately die to a Medusa, some of the more powerful removal options. And so I think Elsa scales if you like untap with literally anything on the board, right? Like a lot of people evaluate it in a vacuum, which I think is fine for a first glance, but also like, suppose you have a Fox on the board, right? Like this card just becomes much more better if you have creatures with high power and willpower on your field going into the play.
Right.
I brought up an Elsa card. I think that's my favorite from the whole dump, but there's definitely a few others. Do either of you have a card that you want to kind of give a standout mention to real quick?
There's one card that I think it's probably not very good, but it's a deck that I've wanted to build for a long time as soon as we've seen cards like this, and it's the actual Wreck-It Ralph Demolition Dude card. It's an inkable 3-cost with 1 strength, 4 willpower, and 1 lore, but it has an ability that says whenever you ready this character, gain 1 lore for each 1 damage on him. And for something about like a self-damage deck has always been intriguing to me because we have a bunch of tools for it, but not any crazy payoffs or any payoffs that are really any better than just playing characters that don't need to be damaged. And Ruby has a lot of cards that don't see play that damage their own characters for obvious reasons, because you don't want to be damaging your characters if you don't have to. But I feel like a lot of that package is within Ruby, because Ruby has a lot of cards that damage their own characters, and then it also has a bunch of cards that ready their own characters. So if you can pair both of those together with Wreck-It Ralph and play card, put a bunch of damage on Wreck-It on Ralph, and then play a bunch of cards to ready him and then exert him over and over again, I think there's some pretty fun combos you can do there of gaining a good bit of lore pretty quickly. It's probably not good enough to play or make meta, but I was excited to see it.
Yeah, that's actually a card I exactly thought the same thing. It's like, oh, we finally have a way to pay out some self-damaging effects, because that is extremely common in the standard big 3 with Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Pokemon. You look at a card and you go, why would you damage yourself? Well, you can get insane amounts of value if you time the damage correctly, where you normally can't. Also, it gives you an opportunity to control certain aspects of the game that you normally can't, and it pays off. Also, on top of that, if your opponent isn't aware of the combo you're setting up, which is essentially a trap, they might swing into Ralph thinking, okay, I'll put some damage in now and then I'll take him out later. And it's like, cool, thank you. That is exactly what I wanted you to do.
Yeah.
And now you're bursting ahead and they're thinking, oh, I shouldn't have done that. So it's almost punishing the player for making a mistake. And even if they don't do it, you can do it to yourself. So it doesn't really matter because either way you're going to win. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting mechanics with a 1/4 that can absorb some sustainable damage and then just gain lore because it says you can.
Right, and also need I remind you that the dinner bell card exists from set 2. I actually had to be reminded.
Yep. Yes, I do.
Yeah, so this is a quick aside, but a quick shout out to Mark Wooden, also known as Raijinku, absolute pillar of this community, wonderful human being. But he posted up his red-green deck. At first, it was just kind of a teaser on his Twitter saying, like, oh, I'm playing red-green control this format, which is, he's known for cooking up some really whack stuff. And by whack, I mean, like, weird, but, like, somehow...
Jank. Like, good jank. Fun jank.
Like, yeah, again, like, paradoxically,
jank that is... Jank is fun.
Correct. Jank that is somehow good, right? Like, in somewhat of a paradox, right? And so he's playing...
It's anti-meta. It's the good stuff. He's a rogue.
Correct, right? And so I asked him directly...
This man plays lawful rogue and Dungeons and Dragons. Let's be honest.
Exactly.
He's like, yo, you stole. Put that back. Pray to your gods, and then I'm going to flog you. Wait, no, please. He's probably a paladin in D&D, honestly.
Exactly. And so I asked him, right? I'm like, even just like point blank, right? I'm like, is there like generally, is there card draw in these colors, right? And I thought about it for a second. It's like there's Queen of Hearts sensing weakness, the Floodborn Queen of Hearts that allows you to draw when you challenge something. There's like the medallion that I think does something similar. I think it's when your thing is banished. But I'm like, oh man, there's like really not any card draw, right? So I asked him, he says, this is the question that needs to be answered to make the deck like this shine, and there are indeed answers, right? And he gave me the classic, like, elementary school teacher, I could tell you the answer, but then that would ruin the journey sort of thing. Right? And so at work,
use the Force, Padawan.
I shouldn't be admitting to this, right? But during downtime at work, I was just looking at the card pool. I'm just like, I just don't see card draw, right? The next day, this man posts his deck list, and he is playing Wounded Beast Dinner Bell combo for his card draw, and I'm just like, unreal. Yep. This is unreal. There you go. I mean, hey, a draw 4 is a draw 4, I guess. A 9-cost draw 4 2-card combo.
I mean, it's +3. You're not mad at that,
right?
Yeah, it's expensive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's expensive.
You gotta do what you gotta do, I guess. That's how that deck makes it to late game, by the way. Otherwise, it runs out of cards.
Yeah. So, to answer your question, something that has dodged Lorcana is a anti-snowball mechanic. So, something that we've seen is usually when someone gets way ahead, they usually have a pretty comfortable control of the pace of the game, and it's hard to catch up. So the new Donald Duck, that's Pie Slinger. It's a 5-cost, 3/6. This card is absolutely my play style. So I love letting my opponent get way ahead, think they're comfy, get cozy. They're going to hold resources in their hand. They're going to overplay and think, oh, I can't lose. And this ability, this card is nuts. So it's Shift 4. 2 abilities, Humble Pie. When you play this character, if you use Shift to play him, each opponent loses 2 lore. So you're able to reduce your opponent's lead. And while an opponent has 10 or more lore, this character gets +6 attack. So he becomes a 9/6, which is kind of crazy. The other thing that intrigues me about this Donald Duck is you can pair him. Which one is it? I think it's Alice in Wonderland, where
Alice Growing Girl. My favorite card
Alice
in the
Growing
game.
Girl. Yeah, that is absolutely my favorite card in the game. So I've been looking for a way to make that card work, and it's just really, really hard because you
cope
don't
with
have
Pete
enough
up
cards.
until now. Yeah, it's just like
Pete was too small. He was too slow. He was too small. It was too many cards. It was too many resources. You're praying for a Yu-Gi-Oh level miracle as the Pharaoh to draw the right cards in the right combination.
I used to own that deck in full Enchanted. I got rid of them recently. It wasn't working. It wasn't working.
No. You're basically playing an Exodia deck, praying to God that you get the right pieces, and you generally don't. And at least with Exodia and Yu-Gi-Oh, if you get those 5 cards, you auto win. With Lorcana, you don't auto win. You have to get them on the board, and it's just not going to happen. So Alice has been one of my secret decks. I've just been waiting for a tool to make that work. And this Donald really makes me suspicious because with support and 9 attack, plus reducing the lore that your opponent has on top of things like, Aladdin and et cetera, there might actually be a way to let your opponent snowball You slowly build that board, and then you can explode with Donald Duck. Then you support into Alice. Then you can use Alice. We might see a resurgence in Belle. It's really interesting that Sapphire has all of these really interesting stipulations of if you have enough of a certain resource, you get a boost in lore. So we might be getting to the point where some of these themes would see actual competitive play. So I really like this Donald. He's also inkable. He's also low enough to hardcast. So I'm very, very intrigued to see if this will be what pushes Ruby Sapphire decks to the forefront of a set 5 meta.
And don't forget, fellas, Dime works with Alice too. Like,
yep, it sure
Dime gets
does.
you there. Yeah.
Yeah, it sure does.
Dime is doing crazy work right now in the format. It's not with Alice, unfortunately, but Dime is causing problems for everybody else currently.
It's actually so crazy to me, and this is just kind of the natural progression of a card game, but it's so crazy to me that there are decks that choose to do nothing but draw cards and ramp the entire game, and then at the end they go, "Oh, by the way, I won."
It's like
you're like, "Oh, by the way, good game."
We'll play Sapphire, so I have 1 million ink in my inkwell, and then we'll play Ruby so that every card you play immediately gets banished, and eventually we'll find Dime and Tamatoa, and then we'll play them both and win.
Yeah, eventually, like, imagine like a storybook that's like, once upon a time, he drew cards, he ramped cards, he drew so many cards, right? And then like there's the climax, falling action, all that stuff, right? And then at the end, when it was time to like wrap up the whole entire thing, it goes, and then he played a lucky dime and then won.
Yeah,
the end.
That's right, one of those games ago.
He had a crab with 6 items and played lucky dime, and then won with 14.
Yeah.
How many is that? 14 lore in one turn. Right?
Yeah, that's one way to do it. I mean, it's something that's not too uncommon in a lot of card games. So if you think about games that have life points, so Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, or Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic, I'm sorry. There's a lot of decks that slowly build and then have this just explosive turn, and you just auto lose. So
yeah.
I feel like that's something that Lorcana can absolutely have. Also, I mean, we're talking about, Steve Warner. I mean, we've seen decks come from Kaijudo and Duel Masters where you kind of slow roll, you slow build, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm going to drop like 3 bombs. They're going to have double shield breaker and just insane stats. You're like, oh,
I'm so glad that you're the first
one
to bring up Duel Masters this episode, Sugi, because I was about to if you didn't.
I was surprised you hadn't. I was disappointed, man.
Yeah,
I was like, come on.
Yeah,
Dang.
So I mean, I love this.
You gotta
game.
earn your keep. Duel
Masters.
Masters
Is my favorite. Duel Masters, but yeah, I mean, like, I think that's the biggest thing that I think would be an interesting discussion, perhaps for another day. I'll keep it short here, but in that game, cards have decks have explosion points where once you hit a certain amount of mana, you have a card that basically like has its own lean engine like built into it. Where it's like, oh, you play, for example, we're in on the mobile game, we're in Dragon Saga, which is essentially you play a guy that then summons a weapon that then once you fulfill a condition, you summon another guy from the extra deck, right? So like the card like just gives you 3 cards worth of like speed attacking value, where you like they just are hasty and they can to put the Lorcana term to it, they can quest when they enter, right? I think that sort of stuff is really cool. Like, I think it's very anime, it's like, oh yes, I finally reached, my ultimate power or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I think when it comes to Lorcana, and this is just when it comes to the general health of the game, I think, something like Tamatoa Dime is okay if a lot of decks have access to really fast lore burst when it comes to that stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's something that I wish, more decks had access to. I think it being kind of restricted to just, Dime Tamatoa decks can be kind of grating for a lot of newer players, just kind of being like, oh, yeah, by the way, I won. It's kind of like...
It's a lot of Sapphire decks that have that burst potential.
Yeah, I don't know if either of you have actually played Buddy Fight by Bushiroad, but they had a whole card type in the game that was just like meant to end the game. And it was like, oh, by the way, I deal 4 damage, which is 40% of that game's life system. And it's like, oh, by the way, this can't be nullified and the damage can't be reduced. So, like, in such an anticlimactic way, it's like, oh, yeah, by the way, we've been having a back and forth. We've been, like, trading resources. We've been activating a lot of cool effects. Like this has been a very cool tempo-based card game. And then at the very end of your turn, you just go like, oh, yeah, by the way, it doesn't matter. Everything we did didn't matter. I just need to get you down to 4 so I can, pitch the win button, right? Like, so.
Well, you guys have played Pokemon, so you remember that there was a format where you had you had that, oh shoot, I can't remember what it was. It was a tag team Pokemon. It was a like Palkia Dialga, I think. But whenever they got a kill, they got an extra prize. And everything in that format was 3 prizes. So if you KO'd one Pokemon, you got 4 prizes, which you only need 6 to win the game. So it was just this nutso hyper aggro. If whoever gets the first kill with that Pokemon probably wins. So we're
made even worse
Disney
by the
Lorcana's
fact that you were the one that gets advantage if you win in Pokemon. It's like, oh, by the way,
yeah, because you draw 4 cards.
Congrats.
Essentially.
Yeah, you're already winning. Here's a draw 4. Here's a wild draw 4.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So I don't think Lorcana needs to get to that level of speed. But I do agree that it would be kind of interesting to see certain deck archetypes have the ability to come back from behind. Because like I said, a lot of tempo, a lot of on curve. The game usually, if I'm sitting at 18, or say 16 lore, and you're sitting at 12, probably favorable that I'm going to win. But with things like this, where you can pull people back using Donald, or you can have this insane burst of lore coming out of Alice or Belle, or Tamatoa Dime, it's very interesting to make sure that decks just don't become out of control. And you always have a chance to come back.
And that's always the challenge, especially because we don't know, if Lorcana will rotate. I believe that it will eventually at some point, but right now I think it's just the very slow, the slow burn of Ravensburger wants to delay the inevitable rotation or ban list for as long as possible. Because typically doing such a thing is could be seen as bad PR. Where it's oh, I don't want to do this.
Brandon,
too
we'll have to have
early,
you back
right?
on the show so we can talk about that, because that's something that a healthy game needs. It needs a rotation, or it needs a ban list.
Yeah,
right. It's inevitable, right?
I
But
think
it's always
rotation.
I could talk so long about this.
We can talk about that.
It's
All right, after we end this recording, we'll book you again, because we got to have that conversation, because I think rotation is the healthier of the two, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Cough. That's all I'm going to say about that.
yeah.
I think it'll be rotation. I think it'll be
Pokemon
rotation.
Magic have rotation. They're doing fine.
Right,
They're
right.
fine.
Yeah,
I prefer rotation.
I think it'll be
Look at
rotation.
Pokemon.
Just
They actually
because
they
had
rotated out
rotation.
a month ago.
Yeah.
And they're doing great. They have a healthy meta. I do wish for rotation. Lorcana isn't doing this, but the one thing I love about Pokemon is they're doing set symbols of A, B, C, D, letters in the alphabet. And so it's really easy to know what the set rotation is, because there's a literal page on their website that says legal cards are A, B, and C.
Right.
And then starting in March, it'll be B, C, and D. And you're like, oh, cool. Well, all of my A cards rotate out. So instead of having to remember set numbers, set symbols, set names, it's just, am I playing with an A card, a B card, a C card, or a D card? I'm like, please, everyone, mimic Pokemon. It's not that hard, and it's super easy for the player to just look at a card and immediately know, oh, I can't play this card after March or June or whatever.
Yeah, that's kind of why I like that the Disney Lorcana cards have the set numbers on the bottom, because if they ever decide to go that route, then you can just say, if the card is number 5 or greater on the bottom, then you can play the card, or however they decide to rotate it. So
yeah, if they keep up with that little EN 5, 1, 2, 3 at the bottom, I think that's a really healthy way, which also made me suspect that there's set rotation, because there is a factor on the card that you can easily denote. All right, cards from EN 1 and 2 are legal until December of 2027, and then in January of 2028 no longer playable. Okay, cool, super easy.
One thing I think is interesting, where I think Hearthstone in the past has implemented a sort of core set, where there's specific cards
they need reprints real bad. Core set would be great.
The issue with a core set is that the first chapter is such a bad core set to base the rest of your game off of, in my opinion. Just because it has
no. Oh man, we got to wrap this up. So here's what they do. Here's how it goes. So the first year you can't do anything really with a core set. There's not enough cards. The best thing they can do, and this ironically does come from Yu-Gi-Oh! And a lot of Japanese trading cards, or even Pokemon, I guess, with the X Fates kind of set, the shiny sets, do a small reprint set. All these cards that are super expensive, super hard for newer players to get, do a small set print. So what's the standard set, about 220?
Yeah,
so
roughly.
Do a small reprint set about, what's half of that, 110? Do a best of. So pull cards like a mini core set. So pull like the best cards from each of the 5 or 6 sets whenever you do the reprint. So this would probably be either Q4 of this year or like Q1 or 2 of next year. So that way, if you're just getting in and you don't have, $700-800 to drop, do like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon where they have a small reprint set, reprint some of the greatest hits, maybe, foil them out, do something special if you want, a big pull for collectors, but give the players reprint sets every so often. So that way they have a way to get into the game without paying a fortune, just like Yu-Gi-Oh! Unfortunately, there's not a rarity system of like, super, ultra, secret, yada, yada, where they can print a card at a lower rarity, so the cost is lower. But if there's more copies of a card in the market, then it's less expensive, and there's more, ability to pull that card. And then probably after 2 years, start doing core sets in the summer, like Magic did, where you've got at that point, 9 sets to pull from. You can just do another full-blown reprint set. And Magic actually started putting in newer cards in that. So out of the entire core set, about 80% was reprints, and then you have 20%. Here's some new stuff. Usually 1 to 2 cards would be meta defining, and the rest would be just fun stuff you could use in. At that point, it would be EDH or Commander, or even, just cards that are good in draft. Or now that we're seeing sets like, what's that co-op, Ursula's Revenge, I think is what it's called?
Yeah, the Illumineer's Quest.
Yeah, the Illumineer's Quest. So if they start to do more of those Lorcana style raids where it's a co-op, I wouldn't hate if they had co-op style cards that are just great for that set where, this card may or may not be meta, but it's really good for co-op games because those are super fun to play with your buddies.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. There's some cards that have never seen play from set 1 that are like some of the best cards that you could play in the co-op set just because of the way they interact with the game. It's actually kind of fun to see those cards get some light shined or shown on them.
Yeah, did anyone ever play the old what's it called? The WoW TCG back in the day?
I never played it, but I've heard about it.
So essentially what these co-op games are doing is what was a raid back then where you'd have multiple players bring their deck. You'd go up against a World of Warcraft style character. So the Onyxia is a very well-known dragon from that game. And so you could tune up the difficulty and you would have some places would run tournaments where it's like, okay, which teams can beat the Onyxia fastest? And it wasn't based on time. It was based on player action. So every time you played a card or took your turn. Yeah. So those were super fun because you're not really trying to like win because you're the better player. It's like, okay, how can our team collaborate to beat this challenge as efficiently as possible? And it's so cool to see people bring different decks and different strategies. It's like, okay, with this deck, we can beat it in 17 actions, but if we draw the right cards with that deck, we can beat it in 15, but it's only an 8% chance of that happening. Yeah, so it just kind of changes the game from a competitive one-on-one meta into all right, let's sit down with my team. We've got our decks. All right, let's see who can beat this the fastest. And, you go from there. So I'm enjoying seeing where Lorcana is going, both in the competitive scene and the non-competitive scene. But yeah, having more cards to be playable in different formats, I think is really healthy because you don't want a game that's only competitive. It doesn't survive.
Right.
There's no game that ever lives in only a singular competitive scene. Minus, I can hear people saying, okay, Flesh and Blood, that's different. But even in Flesh and Blood, there's non-competitive formats that people are playing. It's not 100% only competitive. So Lorcana, I think set 5 is gonna be really fun. But yeah, bursty explosion decks, we could see something pop up, which would be funny.
110%.
Well, yeah, we're gonna wrap this thing up. So Brandon, thank you so much for coming on. You are always welcome on the show. We're definitely gonna book you again so we can have a conversation about rotation or ban lists because I think that would be an easy no.
You can't have both.
No, you can't have. Wait, why would you want both? Wait a minute, hold on. Why do you want? Are you sick in the head? Are you well?
No, rotation plus eternal format, banless and eternal format. Rotation will naturally ban cards. If you want to have an eternal format, you need a ban list. That's
how's your electrolyte count? I'm worried about you.
I just don't understand why this is a hot take, right? Oh, what?
No, we didn't say it was a hot take. We just said it was a take.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think
it makes for good content.
I think it makes. It makes sense. But I mean, think about it this way, right? Magic Standard doesn't typically see bans, although sometimes R&D messes up. But
what?
In
All right, everyone send your
Legacy,
hate mail to Greg
you need
at
banned cards.
tcgcast@gmail.com.
Again, I don't
This
understand why
man
this is a hot
clearly
take.
not a magic player.
This
Oh my
clearly
God.
makes
All right.
sense.
We need to get out of here before we get the water and power bills get shut off and my internet gets
Ramen
cut
Hut
down.
Bruins
from
was a mistake. So was Smuggler's
Heresy.
Doctor.
Oh my
Cards
gosh.
banned standard. Why?
Brandon,
Yo,
tell people where they can
Terraria
find
West
you
too,
before
that's a
Greg gets a
problem.
shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, you guys can find me pretty much on all social platforms at BSquared24. I'm active on X, active on Instagram. Follow me on or subscribe to me on YouTube. Like the videos, do all that good stuff. If you're looking to play Disney Lorcana, there's no real way to play it right now outside of in paper, and so myself and Jonty have started a new community called Real Play Network. It's a Discord. You can find us on X if you need to find a link, but it's a community we've built where people can come together and play webcam games of Disney Lorcana easily. We're setting that up, have some pretty fun stuff planned for the future, maybe that might include some matchmaking and a ranked ladder and that sort of stuff. So excited for that and what's to come with that as well. That's pretty much it.
Yes, everyone go and subscribe and like. For every subscription and like, I will pluck an eyebrow from Greg's face to make him suffer for saying that both rotation and I don't even know what to say about you, my man. I'm worried.
Ban in the eternal format, rotate.
I'm very
in the
concerned.
standard format. It makes total. I'm gonna die on this hill. It makes total sense, but you just don't see the.
This is
vision
a
yet.
very short hill, my friend. Don't do it. It's not worth it. All right. Well, we'll definitely have Brandon back because this conversation is well worth having. So thank you for joining us. We are the TCG Cast. We will see everyone next episode. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see everyone next time.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of TCG Cast. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media at TCG Cast on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And if you're looking to pick up a brand new set of trading card game singles or accessories, go check out our sponsor, alchemistrefuge.shop. This is where we pick up all of our supplies, and we highly recommend you should too. Thanks for joining us on this week's episode. We'll see everybody next time. And remember, play games and have fun.